Hi, this is Lady C. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of The Critical Thought. In the upcoming episode, JT and Daniel will be discussing blood and blood fractions in a rather simplified way.
You're listening to The Critical Thought, where we challenge our listeners to use critical thinking when examining the teachings of Jehovah's Witnesses.
Hi, I'm Daniel.
I'm JT.
Hey, the purpose of this video is to talk to you about the Jehovah's Witnesses and their position on blood and its impacts on you and your family.
Yes.
JC.
All right.
Let's talk.
All right, let's
What
talk.
is the Watchtower's current position on blood? Where did this position come from, and has it changed?
Yeah. Basically, the Watchtower position on blood today is that they have divided what is approved by God and what is not approved by God. They have basically taken blood, set it into two separate groups of fractions, and one group is approved and one group is not approved by God.
All right, so first of all, for our viewers, whether it's Group A or Group B that you just talked about, what is the biblical basis, based on the witness's view, for A or B in terms of position?
Well, this is why, like you always mention, it's good to do your research and do history. One of the things I mentioned in one of my videos is, in order to really see and understand Jehovah's Witnesses teachings, it's good to put it on a timeline. If you put it on a timeline, you'll get to see how God changes his mind all the way down. Then you can use critical thinking to conclude and make a decision whether you believe this is something from God or is it something that a group of guys sitting around the conference room table came up with.
All right, so recommendation number one is think on paper, put it in a timeline.
Put it in a timeline.
So let's talk about a couple of the big timelines as it relates to the witnesses and their position on blood and where this position came from.
Okay. The original position of Jehovah's Witnesses was that whether you took blood or not during a surgery or during an operation was between you and God. That was the original position. Then the witnesses decided to take a position that you cannot take either whole blood or anything that is derived or comes from blood. And of course, they based it on the Bible's statement about abstain from blood. The controversy, of course, revolves around, well, was God talking about blood in the medical sense, or was he talking about in the sacrificial sense, or was he talking about eating blood? And so that conversation goes back and forth. And as I have actually often told people when I had this conversation, at least when the Watchtower took the position not to have blood, either whole blood or anything derived from it, whether you agree with their interpretation, you at least had to concede that the Bible does say abstain from blood. Now it's a matter of what is the interpretation of it. The problem came is when they started doing the fraction thing. That's where the problem just went off. I mean, it literally just went off the rails. Because what they did, they literally came up with two lists. A list of things and fractions that is approved by God and ones that's not. Now, I always think of the example of buying a hot car.
Okay.
Basically, Jehovah's Witnesses took the position that if you have a hot car, you can't buy the car. If someone decides to chop the car up, you can't buy the parts. So if you would never accept hot parts that came from a whole car, then how do you then take blood, which is sacred, but you can take the parts? This is the type of lunacy that the religion put into place. And the effect on people's lives by having these two different lists, man, it's just sad.
You told me a story, or at least a hypothetical, about two sons in a car accident. Can you talk to our viewers about that?
As I said, when you sit down and start considering this teaching, you begin to see how ridiculous it is. Take, for example, you have a Jehovah's Witness couple. They have two sons. They're in an accident. They go to the hospital, and they both are being told these two boys need blood. The hospital is trying to get the blood taken by the doctors and everything. The Jehovah's Witness says, no, we're not taking blood. And so all of a sudden, you now have the news media involved. The local Jehovah's Witnesses, they're out protecting, trying to help this couple stay faithful to God because these two boys need blood. And the doctor is just telling them, look, we need to give them hemoglobin. We need to give them this blood fraction. The witness says, no, the Bible says I can't do this, can't do this. So all of a sudden, this now is making the news. Imagine this is on the news. People are watching this at home. Jehovah's Witness down at the hospital, two sons need blood, they need hemoglobin, but they're not going to take it. one son ends up dying. Now, the witness is celebrated. He's praised by all Jehovah's Witnesses for being faithful to who? To Jehovah, to God, to God's standards. That's the way it's going to be played at the Kingdom Hall. Now, keep in mind, only one son has passed. And the reason why, because the doctors wanted to give him hemoglobin, but that was witnesses. The Bible says you can't do that. 2 days later, Watchtower magazine comes out. That's right. You can now take that hemoglobin.
And my man is gone.
First son is gone. Now, can you imagine this parents? They're now going to go back down to the hospital and tell the doctors, the administrators, we can take it for the second son.
Yeah.
That's the type of lunacy that the teachings, when you have teachings of men, that, as we always say, get elevated to divine status. Can you imagine? And that is exactly what the changes in teachings produce.
So, JT, this literally is a life and death matter.
Oh, my goodness, it's a life and death matter. When my wife was young, she had to have some surgery. And so, as any good parent of Jehovah's Witnesses, they had the doctors put on her bed everything. No blood, no blood, no blood. And fortunately, she didn't need to have it. So many people have lost their family because of this. And when the teachings change, so the fraction that God forbid on Monday, he now says it's okay on Friday.
Wow.
And so that's where the critical thinking comes in. When you put a teaching like that on the timeline, you're saying that God was changing his positions that involve people's lives? No.
This goes back to a lot of the conversations we've had over many of the videos
Yes.
about, JT, how could somebody good looking and intelligent be so dumb?
Well,
okay? And what you're saying is this reality, when you're in high control group, takes place over several issues that would be kindergarten simple for most outsiders.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But for the witness, it becomes a life and death matter. Now, this is the most fascinating thing about it. Once a person has lost their life because of this change, there's no apology. The Watchtower does not apologize for putting out a teaching that was given to millions of witnesses. And these millions of witnesses took this to billions of people's homes. Can you imagine someone who, they work with a witness and, they're like, Joe, I know you're a good, religious man. My child's in the hospital. I've heard something about this blood thing. What should we do? And the witness will get the Watchtowers, and they would have shown them these Watchtowers, these articles that said God forbids the taking of this particular fraction. 6 months later, he comes back and tells his coworker, Joe, I got a new magazine for you.
Well, from a heart standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, you would expect an apology.
Yes.
From a legal standpoint, what I'm hearing is dollars and cents.
Oh, man.
No apology,
No
because
apology.
then there's accountability.
That's exactly right.
Is that right?
That's exactly right. The Watchtower the liability that they would face by coming out and acknowledging that they had no business being involved in these type of medical issues, it would be phenomenal.
Is that one of the reasons why they don't change their policy today and just kind of take this whole discussion off the table?
It's interesting how they are doing this. In fact, a few years back in the country of Bulgaria, they were trying to get themselves established, and they inadvertently tried to make an agreement with the country that they would allow, because the problem was that the country said you are not allowing people to make independent decisions for themselves. So it's interesting how that for just a short period of time, the Watchtower actually agreed, we let our members decide what they want to do. That's up to them. And then people started writing in. So the witnesses can decide if they want to take blood or not. And they realized that the ramification, they had to reverse it. And so they came out and said, well, they misunderstood what we was saying. No, it was very clear. I've had a chance to read. You can actually go online and read the documents. It's amazing. But they was trying to establish themselves. So we see this changing of doctrines. And that's why we say we're talking about what's nothing more than opinions of men.
Wow.
They can you imagine? It goes from opinion of man, elevates up to God's view, then it goes back down. How do you do that?
There's a saying that I heard years ago. When you take the text out of context, you're left with nothing but a con.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's
Seems
so true.
to me that the witnesses have taken this issue of blood, which I think is found in Leviticus. They've taken the text out of context and made it applicable to New Testament times.
Yeah.
And they're left with nothing but a con. And that
Yeah.
con is costing lives.
It's cost people's lives. You cannot, as I always say, you cannot have a teaching of God on Monday that gets reversed on Wednesday. You just can't do that.
When it comes to truth, there's only one test for truth, and that is truth.
Yes.
It's not sincerity. Sincerity is not a test for truth. And if you know that this organization has taken the text out of context and one of your family members or loved ones is left with nothing but a con, you want to take this video, share it with them, delve in deep,
Yes.
3D, and get below the iceberg on this life or death issue.
Yes.
There's actually two things that we would like you to take away from this video. And that is they're teaching on blood fractions and how they presented it.
Yes. The reason why is because this is a very serious issue that has cost people their lives. The Watchtower, when they initially begin to teach about not taking blood, it's very interesting how they presented it. And we're going to read to you exactly how they presented it. Note what they said.
The September 15th, 1961 Watchtower, Respect for the Sanctity of Blood. Paragraph 16. Is God's law violated by such medical use of blood? Is it wrong to sustain life by infusions of blood or plasma or red cells or the various blood fractions? Yes.
It's interesting that the Watchtower said that it violates the divine law of God to take fractions. That's what they said. Now, to drive the point home, notice what they continue to state.
But regardless of whether it is whole blood or a blood fraction, whether it is blood taken from one's own body or that taken from someone else, whether it is administered as a transfusion or as an injection, the divine law applies.
So once again, we see the Watchtower is teaching people. Now keep in mind, we're talking about this is being taught to Jehovah's Witnesses. And in turn, Jehovah's Witnesses are going to the homes of billions of people, letting them know that it is a violation of the divine law of God to take either whole blood or anything derived from blood. And so the Watchtower has been very clear, whole blood or any blood fraction. Now, it's interesting that they went on to drive home the point of how you are going to have to be responsible. Now, notice they even gave the witnesses talking points, what questions to ask themselves when they were faced with this situation. Notice what they said.
In the February 15th, 1963 Watchtower, Carry Your Own Load of Responsibility. Shall he call his congregation servant or the society? That should not be necessary if he is prepared to carry his own load of responsibility. He need only ask the doctor, from what was the plasma taken? How are the red cells obtained? Where did you get this substance? If the answer is blood, he knows what course to take, for it is not just whole blood, but anything that is derived from blood and used to sustain life or strengthen one that comes under this principle.
Now keep in mind, this is being taught as the divine law of God. No whole blood, nothing derived from blood. In fact, they even give him a little question he can ask himself when he's talking to the doctor. If the doctor says he needs something, he's supposed to ask the doctor, well, where did it come from? And the doctor says it came from blood, it's derived from blood, according to the society, he would be in violation of the divine law of God if he were to take it. Now, this is what they taught the people. This is what Jehovah's Witnesses taught the people in their homes. So if a person on your job was faced with this, you would have told them, this is what you do. Ask yourself, where is this substance coming from? Where is this fraction coming from? And if the answer is blood, as the Watchtower says, you're supposed to know what to do. Now, keep in mind, this was when they taught no whole blood, no fractions. And then all of a sudden, the divine law of God changed. Now, this leads us to the critical thinking question. How do you change divine laws of God. And that's what the Watchtower has done. So now we have two lists, one that is approved by God and one is unapproved by God. Does this sound reasonable to you? That God would have two separate lists? And yet this is what Jehovah's Witnesses are taught all around the world. And they will make life and death decisions. Now, ladies, see, you remember that talking point that the society gave every Jehovah's Witness to always say if someone brought up the issue of blood and blood fraction? Do you remember what that issue was, how we was presented?
Yeah, they would always say, well, how would you know if the person was going to live if they took blood?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So they were trying to like make a point,
Yeah.
like, oh, that wasn't a guarantee that somebody was going to continue living.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's a good question. I mean, it's really a good question when you think about it. How do you know if the person has this medical procedure that they'll keep living? But there's one problem, and that is it's the wrong question. You see, the question in this conversation is not a medical question because there are lots of medical procedures where one may or may not survive. That's not what's being discussed. What is being discussed, and the witness has very skillfully diverted the conversation, what's being discussed is, does the Bible teach this? Does the Bible forbid this? So when the witness says, and then we're all taught to say it, how is the person going to live? Well, it's not a question of whether the person will live. The question is, would the person have been in violation of God's law? And according to the Watchtower, they would have. If they had taken any of these fractions that are now on the approved list, they would have been in violation of divine law. And this is the type of things that when you look back at it and you think about it and you start digging, you begin to see that the society literally is making up things on the fly and is costing people their lives.
True.
You know, in the conversation with Daniel, we talked about what we refer to as a hot car, which is in the United States, in most places, it's a stolen car. And a Christian wouldn't buy a stolen car, but a Christian wouldn't also buy stolen parts off a stolen car. And yet this is what the Watchtower basically used as their basis, whole blood and nothing derived from it. And yet we see over a period of time, they begin to say, as it were, it's okay to use certain parts off a hot car. In this case, certain parts of blood. And basically what you're looking at is the problem of when you start getting into areas that they literally have no business being involved in. And as a result, people lost their lives. Very sad indeed.
Yep.
You know, ladies, I mentioned that you had faced the possibility of the blood issue when you were growing up. Maybe you'd like to share it with the audience.
Well, you know what? In my situation, I was very weak. I didn't know what was going on. I had to have emergency surgery. And it wasn't until I actually woke up from my surgery, there was no blood written all over my records.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So fortunately, I didn't need blood or I wouldn't be sitting here today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
And it didn't really dawn on me, and I wasn't really fearful at the time because I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know that I could have been possibly facing the blood issue and stuff like that. But I tell you what, looking back on it, it's very scary because here I was, wheeled into surgery, not realizing what my fate was going to be. I'm sick. I don't know what's going on. But my mother, this fanatical Jehovah's Witness, you know, tells the doctors, no blood. She's not the one laying in the bed about to die if she needs it and doesn't get it, but I am. And everybody's just sitting around just waiting for me to die if I needed blood. So I'm just saying, you know, if you're not in that situation, you don't know what it's like. But I tell you what, if I would have needed blood, they wouldn't have given it to me. Yeah, so it's very scary when you think about it.
It's a bad situation.
Yeah, it is. And then I just want to just make this other point that, you know, when we left the religion, and then when my mom and dad, when my mom got sick, and we had to take her under our care, and we did face the blood issue with her. And we were so happy that we were not Jehovah's Witnesses and that we were able to give her a life-saving blood transfusion. So, you know, we're on both sides of the coin here. Me possibly needing a blood transfusion, and then my mother actually needing one and surviving. So it is good to finally be out of this religion and not be up under their spell, as it were. So if you're contemplating a blood transfusion or you don't know what to do your research, talk to your doctor. Because the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, they're not MDs. They know nothing about blood blood fractions, or anything. So talk this over with a professional, the people that really know about your health. And that would not be the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, because they're not educated in this area. So we want to thank you so much for tuning in to The Critical Thought, and we look forward to having you in our audience in another video. And we'd love to hear what you've got to say about this video, so please leave your comments down below. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe to our channel. And by all means, share this video on your Facebook page and tweet it out to all of your Twitter followers, because this information needs to be shared with as many people as possible.
This is Daniel.
This is JT.
This has been Lady C. Thank you for being in our audience.
This program was sponsored by Critical Thinkers.